In the exclusive Oak Ridge Heights community, where manicured lawns stretched before gated mansions and security systems cost more than most cars, a gruesome discovery shattered the peaceful November morning. The body of Victoria Langley, one of the community's most prominent residents, lay sprawled across her imported marble floors, surrounded by evidence of a rage so profound that veteran detectives turned away from the scene. Blood spattered the cream-colored walls like macabre artwork, staining priceless paintings and crystal vases that had once adorned the pages of architectural magazines. The brutality of the attack shocked even the most seasoned investigators. This wasn't just murder, it was annihilation, a crime of passion so intense that it transformed a sophisticated estate into a nightmare of crimson and broken glass. As neighbors gathered behind police tape, their whispered speculations filled the crisp autumn air. Who could harbor such hatred for Victoria Langley, the generous philanthropist whose name graced hospital wings and university buildings? The woman who hosted the most coveted charity galas in the state and whose approval could make or break social aspirations. None could imagine that the perpetrator had once worn a badge, sworn to protect and serve the very community now reeling from his actions. Before her violent end, Victoria Langley had carved out an existence of calculated perfection. At 54, she maintained the poised elegance of a woman who understood the power of perception. Her chestnut hair, expertly colored to conceal any hint of gray, always fell in soft waves around a face preserved through the most exclusive cosmetic procedures money could buy. Her figure, maintained through private training sessions and strict dietary discipline, allowed her to wear designer clothes with the confidence of someone half her age. Each aspect of her appearance represented another investment in the carefully crafted image she presented to the world. Victoria hadn't been born into wealth, she had married into it. Richard Langley, 20 years her senior and CEO of Oak Ridge National Bank, had fallen for the ambitious art gallery assistant with her keen eye and sharper instincts. Their marriage lasted 18 years until Richard's heart failed during a board meeting, leaving Victoria with an empire she had studied meticulously during their years together. While Richard built banks, Victoria built connections, cultivating relationships with everyone from city officials to cultural tastemakers. By the time of her husband's death, she had positioned herself as more than a banker's wife. She had become an institution herself. In the 3 years following Richard's funeral, Victoria established a new pattern. Her period of widow's black gave way to a rotation of companions, always male, always younger, always temporary. To her social circle, these men existed in Victoria's orbit as accessories, handsome additions to her carefully curated life who would inevitably fade away when she tired of them. None lasted more than a few months before Victoria would discreetly replace them with newer models. The method of dismissal became something of a legend among Oak Ridge's elite. Victoria never officially ended these arrangements. She simply vanished from their lives, leaving them to understand that their season in her favor had passed. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Officer Jack Mercer represented everything Victoria's world was not. The son of a high school teacher and a nurse, Jack had grown up believing in public service and the value of helping others. His childhood bedroom still displayed his police officer costume from Halloween when he was 8, the first indication of a lifelong ambition. Graduating near the top of his police academy class, Jack approached his rookie year with the earnestness of someone who still believed in heroes. At 25, his square jaw and athletic build turned heads, but his serious demeanor and intense focus on his career had limited his romantic relationships. Jack's previous girlfriends had inevitably grown frustrated with his dedication to the job. His last relationship ended when he missed his girlfriend's birthday dinner to cover a shift for a colleague. "You care more about the job than you do about me," she had told him, a criticism Jack couldn't entirely deny. Beneath his professional dedication lay a young man desperately seeking validation, someone whose need for approval made him particularly vulnerable to attention from the right source. The Oak Ridge Police Benefit Gala of April 2018 represented everything Jack simultaneously resented and admired. Assigned to security detail, he stood at attention in his dress uniform, watching as the wealthy and influential networked over champagne that cost more than his daily wage. The opulence bothered him, yet part of him wondered what such freedom from financial constraint might feel like. As he scanned the room with professional detachment, he remained unaware that he had already been noticed. Victoria Langley had spotted Jack the moment she entered the ballroom. Something about his posture, the seriousness of his expression, and his obvious discomfort among the elite instantly intrigued her. Unlike the eager young men who typically caught her attention, this one wasn't looking at her at all. The challenge was irresistible. Calculating her approach with the precision of a hunter, Victoria waited until Jack was stationed near the silent auction display before making her move. Their first conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, Victoria inquiring about security measures while standing slightly too close, her perfume subtle but distinct. To Jack, the interaction seemed innocuous, if somewhat flattering. To Victoria, it was reconnaissance. She noted his respectful responses, the flush that briefly colored his neck when she complimented his dedication, the way his eyes couldn't help but follow her as she walked away. By evening's end, she had extracted key information, his full name, his precinct, his ambitions, while revealing nothing meaningful about herself. 3 days later, Victoria contacted the Oakridge Police Department, expressing concerns about potential security vulnerabilities at her estate following a series of break-ins in neighboring communities. She specifically requested the officer she had met at the gala, the young one with such professional demeanor, to conduct the assessment. The department, eager to accommodate one of the city's most influential residents, assigned Jack to the task without hesitation. What began as a routine security consultation would evolve into a deadly dance of power, desire, and manipulation. Victoria Langley, accustomed to acquiring whatever caught her interest, had identified her next acquisition. Jack Mercer, raised to respect authority and seek approval, had encountered the most dangerous form of validation. Their paths had crossed at the precise intersection of vulnerability and predation, setting in motion events that would eventually transform Victoria's pristine mansion into a blood-soaked crime scene that would haunt the Oakridge community for years to come. Jack arrived at Victoria's estate precisely at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, notebook in hand, ready to perform a thorough security assessment. To his surprise, Victoria greeted him personally at the door, eschewing the usual protocol of having staff receive visitors. She wore casual elegance, yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, but her warm smile and attentive demeanor made Jack feel immediately valued. A tray of freshly baked pastries and coffee awaited in the sunroom where she'd prepared all the property blueprints and security information he might need, an unusual level of consideration that caught him off guard. The security consultation unfolded with remarkable ease. As they toured the sprawling property, Victoria showed authentic appreciation for Jack's expertise, often saying she felt so much safer already with his recommendations. She remembered details from their brief conversation at the gala, his hometown, his father's teaching career, weaving them naturally into conversation in ways that made Jack feel truly seen. When he mentioned skipping lunch for the appointment, Victoria immediately arranged a thoughtful meal with foods Jack had mentioned enjoying, serving it herself on the veranda overlooking her immaculate gardens. By the third hour, the assessment had evolved into an extended conversation. Victoria seemed genuinely invested in understanding Jack's journey to law enforcement while sharing seemingly heartfelt stories of her own life's challenges. She spoke of her late husband with respectful affection but revealed the loneliness of her current position, a vulnerability that resonated with Jack's own solitary existence. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn, Jack realized he'd stayed far longer than intended, yet Victoria showed no sign of wanting the visit to end. For 3 consecutive weekends, Jack returned to implement security protocols. Each visit was marked by Victoria's extraordinary thoughtfulness. She remembered every detail he mentioned, surprising him with his favorite coffee, asking about his recent training certification, even noticing when he seemed tired and insisting he take breaks. When Jack mentioned missing home cooking, Victoria prepared her grandmother's recipes herself rather than having her chef do it. Each interaction revealed new dimensions of warmth and authenticity, with Victoria making Jack feel not just special but uniquely understood. Their professional relationship gave way to personal connection through a series of small, natural transitions. When Jack completed the security installation, Victoria invited him to dinner simply as thanks. When he mentioned an interest in jazz, concert tickets appeared. Each gesture seemed prompted by genuine interest rather than calculation. Soon, their time together extended beyond the confines of her estate. Drives along the coast, quiet dinners at restaurants where Victoria arranged private rooms to avoid prying eyes, afternoon walks in secluded parks where they could talk without interruption. Victoria's world opened before Jack with breathtaking generosity. When he admired a book in her library, a first edition appeared at his apartment the next day. When he mentioned never having traveled abroad, Victoria spoke of Paris and Rome with such vivid detail that he felt he'd walked those streets himself. She introduced him to wines, foods, and experiences with childlike excitement at sharing her pleasures rather than as lessons in sophistication. Jack found himself entranced not by the luxury itself but by the joy Victoria seemed to take in his discoveries. What struck Jack most powerfully was Victoria's consistency and consideration during these early days. When work demanded her attention, she would send thoughtful messages explaining her unavailability, often accompanying them with small deliveries to his apartment. Books they had discussed or specialty coffee he had mentioned liking. When Jack worked night shifts, he would discover she had arranged meal deliveries to the precinct for him and his colleagues. She remembered his mother's birthday, his upcoming qualification exam, the anniversary of his father's surgery, marking each with gestures that demonstrated extraordinary attentiveness. As their relationship deepened, Victoria began introducing carefully selected items into Jack's life. A cashmere sweater because you mentioned being cold on patrol, cufflinks for a department ceremony, a watch she noticed him admiring in a shop window. Each gift was presented with such thoughtful context that refusing seemed ungrateful. Jack found himself gradually surrounded by physical reminders of Victoria's presence even when they were apart, creating an environment where thoughts of her became constant companions. The physical dimension of their relationship evolved with the same careful consideration. Victoria never rushed intimacy, allowing tension to build naturally over weeks. Their first kiss came after a quiet dinner at her home, a moment that seemed spontaneous yet occurred in perfect surroundings. Firelight, soft music, and the subtle scent of flowers. Each subsequent step unfolded with similar orchestration, leaving Jack feeling both pursued and pursuing, never suspecting the choreography behind their seemingly organic connection. As spring turned to summer, Jack's world contracted to revolve around Victoria's schedule and preferences. Sunday dinners with his parents became increasingly rare as Victoria created reasons they should be together instead. Surprise weekend trips, private cooking lessons with her chef, exclusive events that wouldn't be the same without him. His weekly basketball games with academy friends fell away, replaced by mornings in Victoria's pool or private tennis lessons she had arranged to help him relax. His fellow officers noticed the transformation first. The rookie who had once volunteered for every shift now checked his phone constantly, requested time off with unprecedented frequency. His uniform, once meticulously maintained, gave way to designer clothes that seemed incongruous with his salary. His speech patterns shifted, adopting Victoria's cadence and vocabulary. When questioned about his new lifestyle, Jack became defensive, creating distance from the very people who had once formed his support system. By midsummer, Jack had changed entirely. His department regulation haircut replaced by an expensive style from Victoria's personal stylist. His posture, movement, even his laugh reflected her influence. In her presence, he studied her reactions constantly, adjusting his behavior to maximize her approval. When she suggested he call in sick to spend the day with her, Jack complied without hesitation, lying to his supervisor for the first time in his career, a small compromise that would pave the way for greater ethical breaches to come. By late August, subtle shifts in Victoria's behavior emerged like early frost on summer leaves. The woman who once texted Jack throughout the day now took hours to respond. Dinner conversations that had flowed effortlessly now contained stretches of silence as Victoria checked her phone or seemed lost in thought. The changes were almost imperceptible at first, a dinner cancelled with vague explanation, a weekend trip postponed indefinitely, physical affection that felt mechanical rather than passionate. When Jack brought her coffee at precisely the time she preferred it each morning, her thanks seemed perfunctory. The books and articles he shared, once met with animated discussion, now received polite but disinterested acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Jack's emotional investment had reached its peak. Their nights together had convinced him they shared a profound connection that transcended their differences in age and background. In quiet moments, he began planning their future, imagining holidays with his family, weekends at her lakeside property, perhaps even children someday. His apartment gradually emptied as more of his possessions migrated to Victoria's estate, his presence there becoming so constant that staff treated him as a permanent fixture. When he tentatively mentioned meeting his parents during dinner one night, Victoria skillfully redirected the conversation to a charity auction, leaving his suggestion suspended in air that suddenly felt colder. Victoria began attending events without Jack, citing their professional inappropriateness for a police officer. When he did accompany her, she would drift away during conversations, leaving him stranded among strangers while she engaged with new acquaintances. Her phone, previously transparent between them, acquired a new password. These behavioral shifts followed a pattern Victoria's friends recognized from her previous relationships, the inevitable waning of interest that preceded replacement. On a crisp September evening, Victoria invited Jack to attend a gallery opening featuring local artists. Breaking from recent patterns, she seemed particularly attentive that night, selecting his clothes with care and keeping him close as they entered the crowded space. Midway through the event, Victoria introduced him to Marcus Reynolds, a sculptor in his early 30s whose angular features and artistic confidence immediately put Jack on edge. Victoria's body language transformed in Marcus's presence. Her gestures became more animated, her laughter more genuine, her eyes more engaged than they had been with Jack in weeks. As Victoria admired Marcus's featured sculpture, her hand lingered on the artist's arm in a gesture painfully familiar to Jack. She leaned close to whisper observations that made Marcus smile with complicit understanding. The intimacy of their interaction was unmistakable. The same carefully choreographed dance Victoria had performed with Jack months earlier, now replayed with a new partner. In the car afterward, Jack finally confronted her, his voice strained with emotion. Victoria's response came with practiced sympathy, a dismissive laugh, a gentle touch on his arm, and words that crystallized his deepest fears. "Darling, you're being absurdly insecure. Marcus is simply a promising artist I might sponsor. Besides, surely you understood that what we have isn't meant to be permanent." The casual cruelty of her honesty left Jack speechless. The remainder of the drive passed in silence, the gap between their perspectives now unbridgeable. The following week, Victoria became increasingly unavailable. Calls went to voicemail, messages received delayed and non-committal responses. When Jack arrived unannounced at her estate, staff informed him that Ms. Langley was indisposed or in meetings. After days of growing anxiety, he received a brief message informing him that Victoria had departed for a wellness retreat in Switzerland, with no mentioned return date. The message ended with a request that he not contact her during this period of necessary reflection. Jack's attempts to learn more met with polite but firm stonewalling from Victoria's inner circle. Her assistant expressed vague surprise at his confusion. "I thought Ms. Langley discussed her plans with you." Her housekeeper returned the small collection of his belongings that had accumulated at the estate, packed neatly in boxes that seemed to have been prepared well in advance. Friends who had welcomed him at Victoria's behest now regarded him with awkward pity, clearly aware of his status before he fully comprehended it himself. As days stretched into weeks without contact, Jack's desperation intensified. He sent flowers, letters, and increasingly urgent messages, each met with silence. When a casual social media search revealed photos of Victoria at a resort in Bali, not Switzerland, accompanied by the sculptor from the gallery, the last threads of denial snapped. The photos showed Victoria looking relaxed and engaged, her wellness retreat clearly a convenient fiction to facilitate her transition to a new companion. The impact on Jack's professional life became impossible to ignore. He arrived at the station disheveled and exhausted, his performance evaluations plummeting as he struggled to focus on basic duties. Routine traffic stops turned contentious when his frayed patience snapped. His supervisor placed him on administrative duty after he fell asleep during a stakeout, a decision Jack met with uncharacteristic hostility. Concerned colleagues attempted intervention only to be rebuffed with increasing bitterness. Most alarming was Jack's inappropriate use of police resources. He began running background checks on Marcus Reynolds and others in Victoria's circle, documenting their movements in notebooks that filled his apartment. He used department databases to track Victoria's financial transactions and travel records, justifying these breaches as security concerns for a prominent citizen. When a fellow officer questioned these actions, Jack's defensive rage prompted an internal affairs notation that was subsequently buried, a critical oversight in the chain of events that would lead to tragedy. By November, the transformation was complete. The promising young officer who had once impressed superiors with his dedication now existed as a hollow shell, his identity so thoroughly entangled with Victoria that her absence left nothing intact. As Victoria returned to Oakridge with her new companion, establishing a fresh cycle of seduction with practiced ease, Jack's obsession crystallized into something darker and more dangerous than anyone anticipated, a devastating emotional fracture that would soon explode into violence. Jack Mercer sat alone in his darkened apartment, surrounded by empty takeout containers and unwashed clothes, staring at Victoria's latest social media post. Her radiant smile beside Marcus at the Oakridge Symphony Gala tore through him like physical pain. For the 47th consecutive night, sleep eluded him. Jack's mind couldn't process the fundamental contradiction, that someone who had memorized his coffee preference and held him through nightmares about his academy training could discard him so completely. His grief had progressed through denial and bargaining into something altogether different, a fixation that consumed every waking moment. The police department's mandatory psychological evaluation had resulted in extended leave, with the department psychologist noting concerning detachment from reality and inability to process personal rejection. This professional assessment meant nothing to Jack, who had constructed an alternate reality where Victoria remained the person he believed her to be, someone incapable of such calculated cruelty. In this constructed reality, Victoria must be acting against her will, manipulated by outside forces, or sending him coded messages through her public appearances. Jack's apartment walls disappeared beneath a meticulous timeline of Victoria's activities since her return. Photographs taken with a telephoto lens showed her at restaurants, charity events, and gallery openings. Red string connected these images to maps indicating locations, with timestamps and notes about her companions. Jack had created a system of surveillance so comprehensive it would have impressed his police academy instructors, had its target not been a private citizen who had ended a relationship with him. Each morning, Jack parked his personal vehicle 3 blocks from Victoria's estate, using police-grade binoculars to document arrivals and departures. He maintained detailed logs of household staff movements, delivery schedules, and Victoria's daily routines. When she changed her regular coffee shop, Jack interpreted this as a significant clue rather than a simple preference shift. When she wore the blue dress she had once worn with him, he recorded this as intentional signaling. Every detail fed into an elaborate theory that Victoria was communicating with him through a sophisticated code only he could interpret. The escalation occurred in predictable stages. First came the drive-bys, increasing from weekly to nightly. Then the appearance at public events where he knew Victoria would attend, positioning himself just within her sightline. When Victoria began deliberately avoiding venues where Jack might appear, he grew more desperate. He used his police credentials to access her financial records, justifying this illegal action as necessary to protect her from Marcus, whom he had decided must be exploiting her. A former academy classmate encountered Jack outside Victoria's favorite restaurant and attempted intervention. "This isn't you, Jack," his friend said, alarmed by Jack's disheveled appearance and frantic energy. "You need help. Let me take you to someone who can." Jack cut him off, shoving him away with unexpected force before speeding off. The incident was reported to their captain but classified as a personal dispute rather than the red flag it represented. Victoria had initially dismissed Jack's behavior as a temporary reaction to rejection. When his presence became undeniable, she instructed staff to deny him entry to events and ignored his increasingly frequent communications. Security footage showed Jack circling her property at night, yet Victoria refused to file formal charges, telling her assistant, "He's essentially harmless, just a bit desperate. He'll move on eventually." This fatal underestimation of Jack's deteriorating mental state would have devastating consequences. The confirmation of Victoria's relationship with Marcus came through a society column announcing them as co-chairs for the upcoming Winter Arts benefit. The accompanying photograph showed them intimately connected, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him in familiar affection. Jack traced Victoria's face in the newspaper image with trembling fingers, the public acknowledgement of her replacement of him triggering a psychotic break that neighbors would later describe as terrifying. The sounds of destruction from his apartment prompted a wellness check that Jack avoided by disappearing for 3 days. When he re-emerged, a disturbing calm had replaced his frantic energy. Jack methodically cleaned his apartment, shaved his unkempt beard, and pressed his best suit. He reviewed the security protocols he had personally installed at Victoria's estate, identifying vulnerabilities he had intentionally left unaddressed. With cold precision, he documented the estate's blind spots, staff schedules, and alarm codes that Victoria had never changed. His police notebook, once filled with case details and witness statements, now contained a minute-by-minute plan for accessing the property undetected. On November 16th, Jack observed Victoria's intimate dinner party celebrating the installation of Marcus's sculpture in her garden. Through high-powered binoculars, he watched Victoria radiant in a red dress, her hand casually resting on Marcus's arm. As guests departed after midnight, Jack witnessed Victoria lead Marcus upstairs, turning out lights as they ascended. Something in Jack's fragmented psyche finally shattered completely. Dawn on November 17th found Jack meticulously cleaning his service weapon, which department protocol required he surrender during his leave but which no one had actually collected. He transferred specific items from his wall of surveillance into a small leather portfolio, photographs, security notes, and a letter he had written explaining how Victoria had manipulated and betrayed him. By evening, Jack had made his decision. The security codes, once entrusted to him to protect Victoria, would now grant him access for a final confrontation. In his distorted thinking, this confrontation represented not violence but resolution, a necessary conversation Victoria could no longer avoid. As darkness fell over Oak Ridge Heights, Jack Mercer approached Victoria Langley's estate one last time, grief and betrayal having transformed a promising. Victoria Langley's housekeeper discovered the scene at precisely 7:23 a.m. on November 18th. Her scream echoed through the marble hallways, bringing other staff running to the master bedroom where Victoria's body lay amid destruction that defied comprehension. The meticulous elegance that had defined her life stood in stark contrast to the chaos of her death. Responding officers, some of whom had worked alongside Jack Mercer, stood speechless at the threshold of the room, their training momentarily forgotten as they processed the scene before them. Forensic analysis would later document the progression of violence with clinical precision. Jack had entered through the garden access using his knowledge of security protocols, making his way to the master bedroom where Victoria and Marcus slept. The sculptor, a light sleeper, had awakened first and attempted intervention, suffering non-fatal injuries before escaping to a bathroom where he barricaded himself and called emergency services. Victoria, however, had no chance to flee. The attack showed evidence of both calculated precision and frenzied emotion, methodical in its execution yet excessive in its intensity, with investigators noting that the fatal injuries occurred early, followed by numerous additional wounds that suggested a perpetrator unable to stop once violence had begun. Most disturbing to investigators was the careful arrangement of personal items around Victoria's body, photographs from their relationship, jewelry he had given her, and a handwritten timeline documenting what Jack perceived as her betrayals. These items, placed with ceremonial precision, transformed the crime scene into a macabre museum of their relationship. The lead detective, in his 20 years of homicide investigation, would later testify he had never encountered a crime scene that so clearly illustrated the psychology behind the violence, a volatile mixture of meticulous planning and psychological disintegration. Jack Mercer made no attempt to flee. Patrol officers found him sitting in his car 3 blocks from Victoria's estate, still wearing blood-soaked clothing, his service weapon on the passenger seat beside a leather portfolio containing his surveillance notes. He offered no resistance during arrest, his expression described by the arresting officer as unnervingly serene. During the 12-hour drive to the station, Jack spoke only once, asking if Victoria had understood in the end. The question, recorded in the patrol car's audio system, would become key evidence of his detachment from reality. The interrogation room footage played during trial showed a Jack Mercer unrecognizable to those who had known him. Calmly, with the organized precision that had once made him a promising officer, Jack recounted the events leading to Victoria's death, describing his actions as necessary closure to a relationship that could not be allowed to end on her terms. Most chilling was his apparent belief that Victoria had orchestrated her own demise through deliberate psychological manipulation, that she had trained him to respond exactly as he did, making her ultimately responsible for the outcome. As Jack's confession unfolded over 14 hours, he revealed an elaborate belief system in which Victoria's dismissal was actually an elaborate test of his devotion, one he believed he had passed by refusing to accept rejection. In his distorted reality, the violence represented not an ending but a transcendence of their connection into something permanent. Psychiatric experts would later identify this as a severe delusional disorder triggered by narcissistic injury and abandonment trauma, exacerbated by sleep deprivation and professional isolation. The trial that unfolded over 9 weeks captivated the Oak Ridge community and garnered national attention. The prosecution presented overwhelming physical evidence alongside Jack's confession, focusing on the premeditated nature of the crime and Jack's abuse of his police training. The defense built their case around diminished capacity, arguing that Victoria's pattern of emotional manipulation, combined with the department's failure to recognize Jack's deteriorating mental health, had created the perfect psychological storm. Expert witnesses dissected both Victoria's and Jack's psychological patterns in clinical detail. Testimony revealed Victoria's history of cultivating intense, temporary relationships with younger partners, discarding them when interest waned, a pattern one psychiatrist described as emotional sport hunting. The defense introduced testimony from Victoria's previous companions, each describing similar experiences of intense connection followed by sudden, unexplained abandonment. However, as the prosecution emphasized repeatedly, no relationship pattern, however manipulative, justifies or explains extreme violence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Jack Mercer guilty of first-degree murder, rejecting the diminished capacity defense while recommending psychiatric treatment alongside incarceration. The judge, noting the particular betrayal of public trust represented by a police officer committing such a crime, sentenced Jack to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Jack showed no reaction, his gaze fixed on some middle distance as though still unable to reconcile reality with the narrative he had constructed. The ripple effects through Oak Ridge extended far beyond the courtroom. The exclusive community, accustomed to keeping unseemly events behind closed doors, found itself unable to contain the media scrutiny that followed. Residents who had attended Victoria's soirees now gave interviews about always sensing something wasn't quite right with either Jack or Victoria, retroactive insights that carried the hollow ring of hindsight. The police department faced severe criticism for failing to recognize warning signs in one of their own, prompting a comprehensive review of psychological screening procedures and monitoring protocols for officers showing signs of emotional distress. Internal affairs investigations revealed multiple missed opportunities for intervention. Jack's concerning behavior had been noted by colleagues but addressed as performance issues rather than psychological red flags. His misuse of department resources to track Victoria had been documented but never escalated to appropriate supervisors. These systematic failures led to departmental reforms, including mandatory psychological reevaluations following relationship breakdowns and enhanced training for supervisors in recognizing concerning behavioral changes. The case would be studied in law enforcement training programs and psychology courses for years to come, a cautionary tale about the devastating potential of emotional manipulation colliding with obsessive attachment, and the responsibility of institutions to recognize and address psychological distress before it manifests in violence. In Oak Ridge, the Langley estate stood empty for years, its eventual sale and renovation unable to fully exorcise the community's collective memory of the tragic end to a relationship that had begun with such calculated precision and ended with such devastating chaos.